Sabrina Carpenter, Manchild. Let's talk about it. How y'all doing? Welcome to Let's Talk About It, Music Reviews Season 11. How y'all doing? Welcome to the show. Guys, we got a new song from Sabrina Carpenter. I saw this being teased a week ago. I knew we were going to be covering once it first dropped, guys. And hey, you know, for a single that's been teased all week, I would say this one is definitely worth the wait. We're going to go over everything, guys. But before we get into that, guys, I do have to make myself point. I just have to make a point here. You know, I think we've been covering a lot of Sabrina Carpenter lately. We covered that short and sweet album back in August. Then we covered the deluxe recently. And honestly, guys, I will say this. Sabrina Carpenter has definitely put out some very good quality music. Production-wise, vocal-wise, everything.
Shopping is hard, right? But I found a better way. Stitch Fix online personal styling makes it easy. I just give my stylist my size, style, and budget preferences. I order boxes when I want and how I want. No subscription required. And he sends just for me pieces, plus outfit recommendations and styling tips. I keep what works and send back the rest. It's so easy. Make style easy. Get started today at stitchfix.com/Spotify. That's stitchfix.com/Spotify.
Has been absolutely crazy. So how does Sabrina Carpenter follow that up with the new single, Manchild? Let's get into it. Let's talk about it. Starting off with the beat. I'm going to say this, guys. This might be one of the better pop beats that you could, listen to. It does remind me a little bit of, that deluxe, that short and sweet deluxe where we got to see a lot more of the instrumental really take its swing, Guitars on this song get a little bit more shine. There's some guitar solos. There's these little mini instrumental breaks that just kind of happen throughout the track. And honestly, I think that just provides a lot of value to that track. That makes the track where you go, all right, that's just going to absolutely hit. When you have all these little instrumental breaks, all these little mini switch-ups, a moment where the guitar can really go off and do its own thing. I love the southern kind of, the southern shine that's on throughout this whole song. You have the guitars going absolutely crazy. You have some orchestra in the background really absolutely killing it, just adding some soul to the overall vibe. And guys, I will say this, I think this is one of the more, complex. I think this is one of the more complex pop, tracks that I've heard from Sabrina Carpenter. You don't get a lot of, moments where the instrumental can really just take a life on its own. And I think that's a really heavily underrated thing. Sometimes, guys, when we, rely on production, or we don't rely on production at all, and we make these basic-ass pop-produced songs, you're going to get that sound, Manchild, to me, has a little bit of a different sound to it, which I like. And I also like the fact that, the background vocals are still really killing it. I think Sabrina Carpenter, adding those R&B elements of the background vocals to really, just give a little bit more energy to the track, really give a lot more soul value to the track, really wants to make you feel the hook and etc. I like that, guys. Now, we do have some negatives, though, and I think one of the bigger negatives in Manchild is going to be, I do like Sabrina Carpenter's, the playness, the humor that she puts in her songs.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
Choosing a bottled Starbucks Frappuccino drink that's all flavor and just 100 calories? Easy. Choosing between creamy vanilla, double chocolate, and sea salt caramel flavors? A little harder. Try the delicious new Starbucks Frappuccino light drinks. Look for them wherever you buy groceries. Start with Starbucks coffee.
I will say, though, I think, the humor at the end, about the overall song about a man running back to a woman and stuff like that. I like it, when that's played up at the end, when it's, combining the vocals, it's combining the singing, it's combining that with the silliness and the humor. When we have these moments where Sabrina Carpenter just kind of, chills out a little bit and just starts talking throughout the song, I'll be real, guys. I don't like it from Drake. I don't like it from Playboi Carti. When Playboi Carti is fucking talking about baby boy throughout the whole track, I don't like that either. It's the same thing with Sabrina Carpenter, You're going to have that talking, it's just going to bring the track down in my overall gosh darn dang opinion. Also, the next thing I am going to say, guys, one of the most negatives I have to say, probably the biggest negative of the song, is probably going to be the hook. You know, I think the vocal performance on the hook is not the best. You know, I've heard better from Sabrina Carpenter. I've heard better vocals. And I think, you know, I think the Manchild thing only works a little bit. You know, it takes a lot of time to get into the track. You know, guys, I'll be real. This sounds too much like, you know, the Short and Sweet album. And I think this hook really sounds like, you know, all the other tracks that I've listened to, you know, off that album. So having a hook that, you know, honestly, I will say sounds the same, it's a little disappointing. You know, maybe you could have.
I'm Cindy Lauper with fellow Cosentix advocate, Chef Michelle Bernstein.
We'll share our experiences with plaque psoriasis, with psoriatic arthritis, and Dr. Panico will talk about the possible connection.
Cosentix secukinumab is prescribed for adults with moderate to severe plaque psoriasis 300 milligram dose and adults with active psoriatic arthritis 150 milligram dose. Don't use if you're allergic to Cosentix. Before starting, get checked for tuberculosis. An increased risk of infections and lowered ability to fight them may occur, like tuberculosis or other serious bacterial, fungal, or viral infections. Some are fatal. Tell your doctor if you have an infection or symptoms like fevers, sweats, chills, muscle aches, or cough, had a vaccine or plan to, or if inflammatory bowel disease symptoms develop or worsen. Serious allergic reactions and severe eczema-like skin reactions may occur.
Learn more at 1-844-COSENTIX or Cosentix.com/Cindy.
Switched it up. Maybe we could have switched it up with the vocals. Maybe we could have added some more background vocals. Maybe we could have, you know, just did anything else. You know, I will say the flow of the hook stays the same throughout the first hook and the second hook. And honestly, guys, when you have that same hook throughout the same song, it gets a little boring. Now, the good thing about this song is that, you know, the instrumental is very lively on this track. You know, the guitars got their own little solo. You know, you have moments where, you know, you have some orchestra elements in the background. You know, there is all these little elements that definitely do help out. But I will say this, guys, you know, that hook is a little lacking. It's very lacking in my opinion. The flow just kind of stays the same. And, you know, the hook's a disappointing factor. Now, let's get into the verses. We got to get into that now. Starting off with the first verse, I will say this. Besides the talking in the beginning, the singing is definitely on point with the verse. I do like that. I like the flow overall. You know, Sabrina Carpenter can really flow on a track. And I do like this, you know, having these little bitty flow switches, having these little, you know, vocal switches too that just add a lot of great value to the track. So I do like that too. You know, I will say, you know, these verses are like if you, you know, came to a church on a Sunday and, you know, you had the Sunday church meal. You know, it feels homey. It feels good. It feels great to listen to. You know, it's good to eat. It's good food. It's homemade. Everything of those elements are definitely there. So you definitely get that. And then I will say this, the second verse does a lot more better. You know, I think the first one was a pretty good starting point. But I will say this about Sabrina Carpenter, you know, she always shows out. And for, you know, for the hook to be a little basic, in my opinion, the hook's just kind of all right. To have that second verse really add some great value, really add some great, you know, to be able to switch the vocals. There's a lot of more vocal switches in the second verse, those background vocals that's, you know, doing the amen thing and the amen thing in the background. I think all of these little elements just really come together when you listen to the track. And I think, you know, having that second verse provides some great value. So, guys, look, overall, when we talk about this song, when we talk about, you know, Sabrina Carpenter, Manchild, I will say, guys, you know, I think this is a nice track to really start out. You know, first of all, the production goes absolutely insane. I think this is probably one of the best produced Sabrina Carpenter songs that I've heard. And we've heard quite a bit on this show. We've reviewed quite a bit of songs on this show. But I'm going to say this. I think Manchild might be up there. It might be up there production-wise. Now, is it as strong as the hook? Is the hook as strong as the other songs? No. I think this hook is one of the most weakest hooks that I've heard from Sabrina Carpenter. You know, that's what I'm going to say about that. You know, it's a pretty weak hook. But I will say the two verses have some great quality to them, have some great life to them. And when you're listening to the track, you know, it's like, oh shit, these verses actually go really crazy. So guys, overall, when we talk about Manchild, is Sabrina Carpenter coming back to music, dropping a single, Manchild, does it hit the same? Does it still go crazy? Guys, hey, I'm going to say this is a pretty good track. There's some little hiccups. There's some little issues that I have with this track. But, I have issues with all tracks I listen to these days when I do reviews. So, guys, overall, this is a pretty good song. I'm going to have to just give it a 6 out of 10. 6 out of 10, guys. What y'all think about it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? I don't know. Let me know. Guys, if you're on YouTube, Spotify, Pandora, wherever you get your podcast at, make sure you follow, turn on notifications, guys. And, hey, look, there's an episode out for 8 p.m. There's going to be an episode out on 11 o'clock, all right? 11 o'clock, there's going to be another one, all right? 2 episodes right now. Guys, we're fully back. New content every single day, so make sure you follow this show. We got a lot of reviews coming. Lil Wayne, we got Glorilla, we got a lot of content to talk about tonight. So make sure you come back tonight, guys, and we'll see you later. You have a good one. Bye.